Alrighty, guys, welcome back to another episode of Devoted. I'm Dylan Swist. I am one of the hosts of the podcast. I have my friend here with me. I'll let him introduce himself and a little bit about himself.
Hey everyone, my name is Caleb, and thank you to Dylan for having me on. I'm excited to be here. You know, I've been a Christian my whole life, so very excited to kind of share my story and yeah.
All right, and so when I brought up the idea that I had a podcast, you wanted to talk about something that you thought not a lot of people knew about?
Yeah, that's right. There's a verse in 1 Peter, and I'll pull it up here. It's 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, which says, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason to hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect." And I think that's such an important thing in the faith. You know, we go out in our daily lives and people may challenge us, right, in different ways and ask, you know, why do you believe? What's so important about your faith? And, you know, at least for me, the common answer is, you know, I believe what the Bible says. But, you know, people don't always believe in the Bible. And so how do you find a way around that? And there's a really good book that I read. It's called Tactics by Gregory Koukl. And he outlines several different ways to kind of easily explain the existence of God and creation and, you know, what we believe without the Bible. And so I wanted to come on, share a little bit about the book, share why I think it's so important, because again, kind of in daily life, this is something that comes up, and it's really important to make sure that as Christians, obviously, we're prepared to defend our faith, defend God, and explain what we believe and why we believe it.
All right, so in your the question is, how would you explain the existence of an all-powerful God to somebody who, one, either doesn't want to read the Bible, or two, doesn't want to believe in the existence of God?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the book, Gregory Koukl outlines a couple different ways to look at that. I think, at least for me personally, one of the most powerful ones is he says, just take a look up at the night sky. Look at how many stars are out there. Look at how many stars, planets, and all that. And you're going to look at that, and you're really going to tell me that that wasn't created by someone more powerful, right? By someone all powerful, by our God. I just, when I read that, I found that so profound. Another way he looks at it is an argument called the historical argument. He said, look at how history has played out up until this point. Or how everything's played out, how we all got here. And you're going to look at that, and again, you're going to tell me that someone or something wasn't guiding that path. And I just found that really profound. And I know, Dylan, you want to talk about this a little later on, but a third one he brings up that, again, I find really, really profound is just go out and look at nature. I'm a big skier. I love to hike, love to fish. And the reason I love to get out in nature so much is because, I really see God out there, right? We live in New Hampshire. It's one of the most beautiful states in the country, right? You just go up to the lakes. Lake Winnipesaukee is just beautiful. And, you gaze out at this natural beauty, and at least I think, right, like you look at that and you really think, wow, this wasn't created by chance. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the places I'd bring it to is the woman's body. Specifically the womb. A lot of people don't actually understand what happens in the conception of life, but when you look at human anatomy, even scientists say this, there's a God particle. They don't know what it is or its function, but whatever it is, it holds the body together. They say that without it, the body would actually explode. So, how do you explain that? Or even more so, like you said, the stars, you have some constellations that look after certain parts of the human body.
Right.
And I think that's, an absolutely fascinating thing is when you think of everything, is it really possible that a Big Bang would do all that?
Right.
Probably not. The question that I get a lot when I tell people about the stars is, how does something come out of nothing? And they try to get you in that to trick you, like, okay, well, how does God come out of nothing? Well, it's the same thing for the universe. You could either trump somebody with that question or really intrigue them with that question, right. I think. I mean, on that note, how do you explain to somebody how things came into being without the Bible? They really, in my opinion, I don't think they would really have any idea of how they got there.
And that's such a deep question, and I think to answer that, I actually would turn to the Bible for this one because Christianity gives us something called free will. That's not something that, I shouldn't say not something that, a lot of religions and a lot of beliefs have that, but not to the extent that Christianity does. And the Bible essentially says, as long as you believe in Jesus Christ, right, as long as you believe he's the Son of God, you're in, right? You're into heaven. And so when I look at that, to me, do I think creationism? Sure. Do I look at the Big Bang and say that could have happened? Yeah, maybe. But at the end of the day, to my faith, and I think to anybody's faith, the most important thing is that they believe in Jesus Christ. And in Christianity, we're allowed to have these kind of disagreements, right? And people love to bring that up as well. That proves that God isn't real. And it's kind of like, well, to me, it doesn't matter how God created the universe, right? What matters is you look at the intricacy of the universe, and you look at that, and you have to say, right, that there is a God.
I mean, I think what it comes down to is belief, right? Humans have many different belief systems, and even an atheist, somebody who says there's no God, has a belief system. They have faith in something, right? If you look at the sun, if you look at the moon, stars, they're there every single night, right? You don't know where it comes from, you don't know anything about it, you have no control over it, and you have no power over it, but it's like, that it's there, you can see it, and yet you still have faith that it will be there the next day.
Right.
And I think a lot of people need to consider that is, in order to even have a faith to believe in Jesus, it has to start somewhere.
Right, and it has to start somewhere, and I think that is a place where, your knowledge of the Bible comes really in handy, right? It's how do you get someone started off? I love to tell this story, from my faith that really impacted me, but when I was younger, when I was back in high school, my parents were roped into leading a group that our church was doing, a part of a program called Alpha, and it was a program that was designed for people who just were skeptics, said, there's no way that God is real. People who maybe were open to the idea, but had some questions, or people who were new to the faith. And at first my parents were like, great, how did we get dragged into this? And they were given the complete skeptic group, right? They were given a few people who had some questions, but a lot of people in their group said, there's just no way. And I believe the program was about eight weeks, maybe a little longer than that. And afterwards, the group liked it so much, they said, well, we'll just turn it into a small Bible study, small group at home. And so I got to meet them all, and they're really wonderful people, and watched them grow in their faith. And it was really funny. We sat down for the first group, and my dad asked the group, said, okay, well, where do you guys want to start? Because they had never read the Bible. These are adults who had never read the Bible before, right? People who had been to church either not at all in their lives, right? Which is just, to me, that's crazy to think about. Not at all, or just once or twice in their lives. And my dad said, where do you guys want to start? And someone in the group said, I want to read Revelation. And my dad said, how about the book of John? And so we did. We started in John. We read the book of John. And then they said, and my dad said, okay, let's read another gospel. And they said, how about the book of Revelation? My dad said, all right. My mom and dad said, all right, how about the book of Acts? And so we took them through the gospel and through church history, and watching them grow and the questions they had were just so profound to me. And now everyone in that group has helped out at the church in one way or another. It was just really neat to watch them grow.
I mean, I think another important thing is not just the perspective from the Christian, but of the person that you're trying to talk to. You got to understand where they're coming from and what they may or may not have experienced as well. I mean, for example, maybe they've been in control and been in power their whole life. Or maybe they have anger issues, or they don't like certain aspects about God that they don't fully understand yet. Such as, they've heard stories, or they've heard people speak wrongly about God. Things like that could really affect them. I think perspective, not only belief and faith where they come from, but perspective could really hinder them from really opening the book, picking it up, or even asking questions. It could really just silence them and anything that they have to say.
That's right. And one other thing is, when you have these conversations with people, you have to make sure that they're ready to receive it, right? I mean, there's people in my life who I have these conversations with, and they're just not ready, right? And I think as Christians, it's important that we say, okay, they're not ready to receive the gospel, right? The gospel is, or Jesus, right? Our faith is a gift from God, and you can't force a gift on somebody, right? I mean, I guess you could, right? It's like you force a gift on your kid at Christmas, right? It's, you have to make sure that they're ready, and make sure that you keep an open mind, right? They may not be ready to receive the gospel, but that's okay, right? And you can kind of plant the seed and pray about it. That's what I do, and there's people I pray for every week who aren't ready to receive it yet, but who one day I hope are going to be able to come to me and say, you know what, I'm ready to have a conversation.
Yeah, I think that's equally just as important as, the right ingredients is what I would call it. Cooking, you have to have the right ingredients and mixtures in order for the result to be what you want it to be. Otherwise, take it like a brownie. You put too much salt, you're not going to like the brownie that you're eating. It's going to taste like you're tasting a wave from the ocean. Gross. But I think that one of those ingredients is a softened heart. It's described multiple times in multiple stories of the Bible. Even Pharaoh himself, a man in power, like we just said, who, it was said that God hardened his heart.
That's right.
So that he couldn't even be open to understanding what was going on. He didn't want to. Mm-hmm. And I think different circumstances or God under certain circumstances could cause somebody to have that hardened heart, which would hinder them in hearing the word, or maybe they're just, not open yet, or the timing's not right, stuff like that.
That's right. And I think there's a story in the book of Joshua when Israel was going through their, I don't know what you want to call it, their life cycle of God sends a prophet kind of gets Israel right back on the right path, and they fall into sin again. Well, one of Israel's kings had fallen into sin, and so God had said, I've had enough with you. And he sent an army to the walls of their city, and the king of Israel looked out, and that was when he knew. He said, wow, okay, only you, God, only you can stop this, right? And I think for a lot of people, that's ultimately what it comes to. They kind of have that moment in their life, right? Okay, only God, or only whoever or whatever's out there is ready. And I think as Christians, we need to be ready at any time to have that conversation.
All right, so I think that really answers the first question is, how do you prove the existence? But I think the second part of this podcast that I wanted to ask you today was, so say somebody says, why is it so hard to find the existence of God? Like, why is the evidence just not there sometimes? And I think I'd like us to answer that today. And I have some scriptures, but I think I'd like to, hear an answer from you first, see if we match answers on this.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I just like for that's one thing I've thought about a lot, right? Is God feels so distant. And actually that was, I talked about the Alpha group. That was one of the questions they kept asking is well, how do you, it's not like we see God every day, right? I wish that you could wake up in the morning and I walk out of my bedroom and I've got an angel reading a list of sins that I've committed, from the previous day, right? It's like, get back on the right track. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. And one way I think it's described in the book, and I've heard it described, is it's almost like we're looking at tracks in the snow, right? God has left his imprint on earth. And again, I would just say, you look out at creation, well, that was obviously not created by chance, right? That's God leaving his footprint to look in. But just to share a story from my life, about one time where I really felt like, wow, God is right there. Again, when I was back in high school, my grandfather was suffering from dementia, which is very, painful, very slow kind of disease. He was pretty much nonverbal by this point. Just to kind of give you an idea, my mom, dad, and I were going over to his home to feed him dinner. And I say feed because literally you have to, hand feed him dinner, and my mom would have to get right in his face and say, you need to chew your food, you need to chew and swallow your food, because he'd just forgotten how to eat. And so we're going to spend some time with him, and what do you talk about with an 84-year-old who has dementia and is nonverbal, right? And I just decided I was going to read the Bible to him. And I was going to read my personal favorite passage, which is Isaiah chapter 53, which, just to summarize, talks about how everyone has turned away from God. But like a shepherd, God sends Jesus, his son, after the one person, right? One person. And God has laid on Jesus all of our sin, the word that's used is iniquity, which is another word for sin. He's laid our sin on Jesus, right? And we don't have to carry that burden anymore. He came to take that burden. And the chapter closes with a prophecy of Jesus dying on the cross for those sins. It's something along the lines of he was nailed to a tree, something like that. And bonus, it's only 13 verses, so it's a really quick read. And so I started reading it to my grandfather, and he leaned forward to grab my hand, and I kind of stopped for a second. He said, no, Caleb, keep going. I was kind of like, whoa, I mean, to have him say that was really something. So I kept going. I finished the book of the chapter 53 in Isaiah, which again closes with this prophecy of Jesus dying on the cross. And he leaned forward to me and he said, I've been there and I've seen that. And I still get goosebumps when I talk about that. Someone who was so far gone, he barely knew who I was. For him to come forward and to trust us, to say, I've been there and I've seen it, right?
Right.
We all say that God speaks to us. I think God was speaking to me right then.
Yeah, I mean, I think at that time, God really found you. And in a sense, you can't find God unless one of two things happens. Either God reveals himself to you in all of his presence, or you seek him with all of your heart. And I think at that time, your heart was just ready to understand and
Absolutely.
ready to accept him. And he used your grandfather through that. And I think that's completely awesome. I think when we ask ourselves, why is the evidence sometimes just not there? I think it's because we're looking through man's scope of things and what we've been taught or what's been told to us, maybe some lies we believed or something like that. I think God's view and God's scope of things equally just as important, which is why we are going to bring the Bible into it at this time. I think Romans 1:20, which states that God's evidence of existence lies in his creation. That's what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast was, you look up at the stars, you look up at the sky, and there's no way it could just be there. I see it kind of like God's canvas. A canvas doesn't start out as nothing, it starts as a blank slate, which is something. God spoke it into existence and then he worked with it like putty, or a piece of wood, which is ironic considering he was a carpenter's son.
That's right.
I think that, part of it also has to do with spiritual blindness. Sometimes, in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4, it says that the God of this world has blinded the hearts and minds of the unbelievers, causing a state of spiritual blindness. Meaning that as soon as you're born, it's described as a spiritual veil going over your eyes. Meaning that you physically cannot see, even if you had the will to. That we no longer can understand that unless somebody tells us the truth and that God reveals the truth to us.
And I just look at the story of Saul, right? His conversion to the Apostle Paul, right? I mean, he was literally blinded by God on that road.
Right. That's a really good example. I mean, that's kind of what it's like, right? Sometimes I feel like as Christians, even though we've had that veil of deception removed, that sometimes we still wish we did it. Sometimes it's hard knowing the truth and having to walk in it. And it's a huge blessing, but sometimes I feel like it's the greatest burden you're ever going to have.
Right.
And people always say it's the easiest thing that you do is come into Christ, and that's a coward's way out. No, it's the hardest thing that you're ever going to do, and you're really going to feel it every single day. The temptations, they're still there. The urges of the physical flesh, they're still there. I mean, one of the verses that I wanted to look at today was Jeremiah 1:5. It speaks of how God is there in the womb. He's there at the conception of life, which is such a profound statement. He says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. I think that speaks such great volume that God, really is there at the beginning of creation. I mean, that's the proof of the creation itself. God was there before you even were knit in the womb. He had the concept. He has the blueprint. He is the architect behind everything. Mm-hmm. And that's all I had for that. But, there's so much more in the Bible and everything that talks about, the existence of a creator or the creation and how it was created.
Yeah, and again, like I said, I would just go back to what I was saying earlier, and just looking out at our natural beauty, right? That's at least what I've always found so profound. I love, like I said, I love skiing, I love hiking, I love fishing, right? And you look out at the lake or the mountains, and it's just like, wow. You can't, I mean, I can't look at that and say that wasn't created by God.
One thing that a lot of people don't realize is, and something that that I've had used against me, was how is so much death and destruction throughout creation if it was made to glorify God? And I think the answer to that question lies in, well, how does the water know where to go? How do these things know how to happen?
Right. The Bible's very clear about that too. It in no way says being a Christian is going to be an easy life. Right? I think a lot of people come to the faith and they think, great, I've got it. I've got everything made. No more suffering, no more pain. It's like, well, that's, as much as I think we wish that was the case, I wish that was the case. That's not the case. The Bible is very clear about that. And again, I think that's just another reason why, we need to be ready to defend that. And why is this happening, right? I mean, Jesus was tempted for 40 days, in the desert by the devil. Luckily, I don't think anything quite like that's going to happen to us. But as Christians, we do need to be prepared for that. And again, the Bible's very clear on that, right? It's not going to be an easy life.
I think one of the things we need to consider when talking about this is the curse that's found in Genesis, where the earth literally got cursed. A lot of people don't understand. Sometimes the devil doesn't have to touch you. Sometimes It's not the devil coming after you. It's your own flesh that's tripping you up and tempting you and giving birth to death. As soon as you're born, your flesh literally desires for you to die, it is said. And that's the only thing that sin can conceive is death. Which is exactly why we need Jesus to come, because we couldn't deal with the problem on our own. We are part of what is a generational curse, meaning we get inherited into it through our parents. Something a lot of people get, confused is Adam and Eve were made in the image of God, and they chose to throw it away.
Right.
We are made in the image of our parents. We lack the holiness of God, which is a trait that that Adam and Eve had, that they chose to get rid of. We don't even experience in this lifetime any of the holiness of God, except for when we die and we get to go out to be with Him.
Right. And I would just kind of off that, Dylan, I would encourage people to read the story of Job, right? If they kind of want an idea of what it's going to be like.
You want to kind of go over what the story of Job is?
I'd love to. The story of Job was someone who followed God fearlessly, right? He was God's biggest worshiper. And Satan came to God one day and said, basically, I'm going to show you, and Job doesn't really follow you. And God said, okay, fine. Do whatever you want to him, but don't touch Job himself. And so Satan destroyed Job's house, destroyed his farm, took his money, right? I think even killed his kids, started killing his kids and family, yeah. And Job said, no, I'm still going to follow God. And Satan said, well, it's just because you didn't let me harm Job. And God said, okay, fine, you can harm Job. And Job broke out with disease, and I think the Bible says there was boils on his skin and all these very painful kind of images. And Job still followed God, and God basically said to Satan, right, I told you so. And God restored everything. Of course, that's not to say that it's all doom and gloom, right? I think being a Christian is extremely rewarding, right? I think we're incredibly blessed. I get to look at the blessings in my life and really thank God for that. And, hey, we do follow the God, the Jesus that turned water into wine. So there is that too.
Yeah, the thing on that note too is, so many times people only want those big miracles. Like, why isn't God still doing this today? Well, you get up and you're able to breathe every morning. Right. That in itself is a miracle. In Acts 17 it says God doesn't need anything from us. A lot of people, they get lied to about the punishment of not obeying God or not following what God wanted. And they just get told that it's separation. The truth of hell is that it's you choosing to go by yourself with no defense to take on the wrath of God by yourself. And if you look at the Old Testament God, He is still very much the same. And he destroyed whole cities over, failure to obey. He even punished His own people by putting them into slavery, which is crazy to think about, but it was completely necessary. Sometimes in order for, God to reveal Himself to somebody, they have to lose what they have to soften them up. I remember I grew up in church. I had a good life and still wouldn't believe in him. So I challenged him. And I was like, all right, God, I bet you can't take anything out of my life because I built it up myself. Not only did he take everything away from me, but he broke the character that I was. And it was at that moment when I hit rock bottom, had nobody left, no help, nothing, that I realized that he simply did it because I asked him to. He wanted to break the foundation that I was built on, which was the pride of life, the pride of, of being who I was, of being in control, being in power. And sometimes a lot of people don't realize, sometimes bad things happen to reveal the goodness of God. And that's a hard twist, but eventually you'll catch on to what's going on if it doesn't stop.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And, kind of like you were saying, Dylan, in that moment when you did make it to the bottom, you were ready. You were ready to receive God. And like I said earlier, that's something that's so important when you're going to have a conversation about your faith, right? Is you need to make sure these people are open, ready to receive it, just like you were.
Yeah, with like Job, he was there the whole time. He trusted God, and I think that faith is so important. Like we were saying earlier, sometimes people lack faith, right? That veil that gets mentioned, which was important in the Old Testament because Moses had seen the glory of God. It's said that we get a similar veil, except it's one from the enemy instead, and that it can only be removed by a leap of faith. Which means that only when you decide to seek him with all of your heart will that veil be removed, and you'll see the truth for what it is.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
And I think that is something that prevents people from seeing. They want evidence, they want that, but it's like, where is your faith? Are you just trying to bash out at God, or are you genuinely trying to find him?
Right, and if you look at the definition of the word faith, it means believing in something that you can't see. And like I said earlier, it's not like we see God every day. Right, well, we do, but not in a physical way, is what I mean to say. And so we have this faith, right? We believe in God, even though, like I said, it's not like I wake up in the morning and he's standing in my living room ready to read me a list of things I've done wrong the previous day, or did right, however you want to look at it. But that's why we have that faith, right? Is we believe in God.
We were talking a little bit about earlier how some of the characteristics of God people don't like. I think one of those things that they have is fear. Fear being judged or fear being, damned, literally, which we're supposed to have, and they don't realize that we have that as believers as well, of not being good enough, or, well, I don't want no judgment, and I don't think they understand that when somebody truly believes in Christ and you come to them with a problem, they don't judge you. They revert you back to the Spirit and have him work with you. We're all works in progress, right? Which is why I like the term masterpiece so much. It's never truly done. It can always be upgraded. And that's what a walk of God is a process of being made perfect like he is.
Right.
We start as that blank canvas of having been born into sin, and then we see the beauty come out of that canvas, and that's what God does.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's what I love about Christianity too, is everyone's in a different stage of their faith, and everyone's in a different stage of their journey, just in life too. There's a verse in Luke, and it says, don't take the log out of someone else's eye when you have the speck in your own eye, right? And we're not here to judge you. We're not here to tell you you're living your life wrong. We're just here to give you the gift that was given to us, right? It's the gift of Jesus, right? And believing in him and life and what that means.
And I think it's important to tell people today that they really got to think, right? Because what a person says might hurt you. But if it is the truth, it will reveal itself later through that hurt, and it will rebuild you on a better path. A lot of people are scared to get cut. The Bible mentions that the word of God is described as a double-edged sword. I don't think a lot of people know how much damage a double-edged sword is going to do to you before you see any good in it.
Right. I think that's a perfect analogy. Yeah.
And, it's like we said, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is still the same. It's important to revert them to this book, not only because of who God was in the New Testament, where love, mercy, compassion, and grace get shown, but also because of who he was in the Old Testament, where he literally judged people for having the problem of sin. And if he is the same, then it's important for them to understand that position that they're going to have before a God like that.
Yeah, that's right. And he is the same God, and he will be the same God forever and ever. And that's the thing with God. He's not going to change. He's always going to be there. He'll be there for us when we need him, and he's always listening to us.
I think that's all I got for today. You got anything else?
No, I think that was perfect. Again, I would just encourage everyone, like I say, we need to be ready to defend our faith. And we need to be open to having those conversations. And we need to make sure people are ready and willing to hear. And that's one thing I've certainly tried to live in my life and throughout my faith. And I would really hope that others do the same.
I think I'll leave it with Matthew 10:33, which says, "If anyone rejects me before man, I will reject him in front of the Father." As somebody comes after your faith, either hostilely or even ambitiously, you have to be able to speak the name of Jesus confidently and really stand on your belief in Christ. And I think you said that perfectly.
Yep, I think that's a perfect place to end it.
All right, well, it was an honor having you on.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you.
Caleb. I hope to do this again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to.
That's going to do it for us today. I'm Dylan Swist.
I'm Caleb Kruger.
And we hope that you have a good rest of your day and that you really learned from this video and maybe got some questions. If you do, leave them in the comments or, maybe reach out to the channel, and I'm sure that the two owners of the podcast will answer. Maybe even try finding God now. Maybe give it a shot. If you feel God's calling you, make sure that you answer. Sometimes people hear the calling and just choose to walk away. Maybe try changing it up and actually listening to him for once.
Yeah, exactly. God is ready when you are. That's what I like to say.
Perfectly said. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Have a good day, folks.